My name is Harper Lane. And the first day I walked into Wellsworth & Co., I knew exactly the kind of battlefield I was stepping onto. The office smelled like ambition, desperation, and overpriced cologne. Suits clicked across marble floors. Eyes flicked up from designer laptops to size me up, then flicked away just as quickly. Dismissive, superior. New temp? Someone muttered under their breath. God, HR is getting lazy, another snickered. I smiled politely. I nodded when they talked over me. I took notes when they assigned me menial tasks. Every insult, every slight, every sideways glance, I absorbed it all. Because this was exactly what I wanted. My assigned supervisor was Mr. Bradford. Middle-aged, balding, a gut that strained against his tailored suit. The man reeked of self-importance. On my first day, he handed me a massive stack of paperwork without even looking up from his phone. "You're here to make my life easier," he grunted. "No, welcome aboard. No, let me show you around." Just an order? Like I was a piece of office furniture. Perfect. Over the next few weeks, the pattern solidified. Bradford barked orders. The queen bees of the office, Chelsea, Brianna, and Tori, made sure I knew my place at the bottom of the social ladder. "Cute dress," Chelsea said once, fake smiling. "Walmart, right?" "You're so brave for not wearing makeup," Brianna added, laughing as she walked away. Tori didn't even bother speaking. She just rolled her eyes dramatically whenever I entered. A room. Meanwhile, the senior partners, the so-called kings of finance, barely acknowledged my existence. To them, I was invisible. Background noise, disposable. Exactly how I needed them to see me. But when I went home at night, I wasn't. Licking my wounds. I was strategizing, reading financial reports, studying internal memos, watching, listening, learning. Because 3 years ago, my father lost everything because of companies like this, because of people like them. He was a good man, too good for the cutthroat world of corporate mergers. Wellsworth & Co. had helped orchestrate the hostile takeover that ruined him. He died heartbroken, thinking the world was rigged against people like us. He wasn't wrong, but he also didn't know his daughter had inherited something stronger than his kindness. His fire. And I was about to burn Wellsworth to the ground, from the inside out. 6 months before I walked into that building, I had already begun. Through a shell company, I bought up small, seemingly insignificant shares of Wellsworth & Co. Tiny pieces, scattered across minor investors. No one noticed. Not when you did it slowly enough. Not when you played the long game. And when an internal scandal forced the firm to quietly offload a bigger chunk of shares, trying to avoid a PR disaster, I was ready. I acquired a controlling interest without them even realizing it. On paper, they still thought they were in charge. In reality, I owned them, every smirking, backstabbing, power-drunk one of them, but I wasn't satisfied with a silent takeover. No. I wanted them to feel it. I wanted to stand in the middle of that gleaming office, surrounded by their sneers and contempt, and watch their faces when they realized who I truly was. I wanted them to choke on their arrogance. The plan was simple. Wellsworth & Co. had an annual shareholder meeting coming up, a grand event where they paraded around their successes to investors. They expected the same boring rubber stamp votes. They expected applause. They expected compliance. What they didn't expect was me. The night before the meeting, I barely slept. Not because I was nervous, because I was ready. Because every humiliation, every whisper, every fake smile had sharpened me into a weapon they couldn't even see coming. The morning sun sliced through the city skyline as I stood in front of the Wellsworth skyscraper. Same outfit as always, modest, plain, forgettable. Same posture, head slightly bowed, eyes downcast. The perfect corporate ghost. I entered through the employee entrance, unnoticed as usual, rode the elevator up to the 40th floor, slipped into the grand conference room and took a seat near the back. The room buzzed with the smug energy of men who thought they owned the world. Bradford strutted past me without a glance. Chelsea and Brianna giggled in a corner. The senior partners clustered around, shaking hands, slapping backs. The chairman, Mr. Langston, called the meeting to order. He launched into a speech about unprecedented growth and record profits. I checked my watch. Almost time. When the moment came, Langston cleared his throat and announced, "And now, a word from our largest shareholder." He checked his notes, frowning slightly. "Ms. Harper Lane?" The room froze. Dozens of heads snapped toward me. Bradford's face drained of color. Chelsea's jaw actually dropped. I rose from my seat slowly, savoring the silence. I walked to the front, heels clicking against polished wood. I turned to face them. The men and women who had belittled me, dismissed me, tried to break me. And I smiled. The kind of smile you give just before you pull the trigger. "Good morning," I said, voice calm, clear. "Effective immediately, as majority. Owner, I am assuming full executive control of Wellsworth & Co." A gasp rippled through the room. "There will be structural changes," I continued, "including a complete reevaluation of current staff positions." I locked eyes with Bradford, who looked like he might pass out. Starting with leadership, it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Panic, confusion, desperation. And for once, I wasn't the one being underestimated. I was the one writing the rules. And trust me, this was only the beginning. The silence in the room was almost deafening. For a brief moment, no one moved. No one breathed. It was as if the air itself had frozen in place, suspended in pure, disbelieving horror. I stood at the front, feeling every pair of eyes drilling into me, their minds scrambling to comprehend what had just happened. I let the silence stretch, savoring the confusion, the growing panic that crackled just beneath the polished surface of their expensive suits and fake smiles. "Mr. Langston." The once proud chairman cleared his throat awkwardly. "Ms. Lane," he began, his voice shaking slightly. "Surely there must be some misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," I interrupted smoothly, letting my voice cut through the room like a scalpel. "I now hold a controlling interest in Wellsworth & Co. My authority is final." Bradford stumbled forward, face blotchy with rage and fear. "This is absurd. You're a temp. You have no idea what you're doing." I turned to him, my smile sharpening into something almost cruel. "Mr. Bradford, you'll find that under new management, incompetence and disrespect are grounds for immediate dismissal. Effective now, you're terminated. Security will escort you out." The color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. A ripple of murmurs spread across the room like wildfire. Bradford opened his mouth as if to argue, but snapped it shut when two security guards, previously standing discreetly at the back, began to approach. I watched him stumble toward the exit, his bravado crumbling with every shuffling step. One down. Turned back to the crowd. "There will be a full restructuring," I continued, voice steady. "Departments will be evaluated, leadership reassessed. Loyalty, competence, and ethics will be the new standards here. Not nepotism, not favoritism, not backroom deals." Chelsea, Brianna, and Tori exchanged terrified glances. I could see them calculating, scrambling to figure out if they could save themselves. "Ms. Lane," Chelsea said, forcing a brittle smile. "We're so excited about this new direction. We've always said the company needed fresh leadership." I cocked an eyebrow. "Is that so?" "Because according to internal communications," I said, pulling out a printed email thread with a dramatic flourish, "you and your little clique referred to me as the charity case and office wallpaper the first week I arrived." Chelsea's face turned a blotchy shade of crimson. Brianna looked ready to bolt. Tori actually muttered something under her breath that sounded suspiciously like a prayer. "Effective immediately," I continued. "You three are also terminated. Your toxic attitudes have no place in the future of this company." Gasps echoed around the room. The queen bees had been dethroned in less than a heartbeat, and I hadn't even raised my voice. I watched as the guards escorted them out, their heels clicking awkwardly against the marble floor, the same marble they used to strut across with such smug confidence. Now they slunk away like the cowards they were. The rest of the staff shifted uncomfortably, the reality of the New World Order sinking in. Fear was a powerful tool, but I didn't want them paralyzed by it. Not entirely. For those of you Willing to adapt, I said, voice softening just enough to offer a sliver of hope. There will be opportunities. Loyalty, hard work, integrity, those things will be rewarded. I saw a few cautious nods, a few glimmers of something I hadn't seen since I walked through those doors. Respect. Maybe even admiration. Langston, still standing awkwardly at the podium, tried to salvage what little dignity he had left. Ms. Lane, surely there must be protocols, procedures. The procedure, I said, cutting him off again, is that Wellsworth & Co. has operated under a regime of corruption, favoritism, and incompetence for far too long. As majority owner, it is not just my right but my duty to dismantle that system. Langston's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I didn't give him the satisfaction of finishing whatever pathetic excuse he was about to offer. Mr. Langston, I said crisply, your resignation is effective immediately. You may collect your belongings and vacate the premises by noon. Another gasp rippled through the room. Langston's face turned an alarming shade of purple, but he knew. He knew there was nothing he could do. His power was gone. His reign was over. I didn't bother watching him leave. My focus was already moving forward, past the wreckage of the old regime, toward the future I intended to build. I glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of every remaining employee, one by one. Change is here, I said. Adapt, rise, or get out of the way. I walked out of the conference room to the stunned silence behind me, my heels striking the marble with deliberate, triumphant precision. By the time I reached my new corner office, the one that used to belong to Langston, word had already spread like wildfire through the building. Faces turned toward me as I passed, a mixture of fear, curiosity, and something else. Hope. Maybe not much. Not yet. But it was there. I sat behind the massive mahogany desk, feeling the weight of it, the history, the battles fought and won here. This was more than just revenge. This was justice. And I wasn't finished. I pulled out a folder, a thick dossier of every backdoor deal, every unethical client, every fraudulent report that Wellsworth & Co. had hidden away over the years. Exposing it all was next, burning the rot out completely, building something better from the ashes. Because this wasn't just about avenging my father anymore. It was about proving that people like me, people who fought, who endured, who refused to be broken, could win. Not by playing their game, but by rewriting the rules entirely. I leaned back in my chair, the city skyline stretching out before me, glittering, and full of endless possibilities. Let's get to work, I whispered to myself, smiling. The morning after the shareholder meeting, the air in Wellsworth & Co. was electric with uncertainty. Whispers buzzed like static in the halls, eyes darted away when they met mine. Every move I made was a declaration. This was no longer their playground. It was mine. I spent the first few hours locked in the conference room with my new, hand-picked executive team. The few who had survived the purge were either sharp enough to adapt or too valuable to discard yet. I laid out the new vision: transparency, ethics, growth, words that had been foreign to this place for far too long. But talk was cheap. Action was what mattered. I assigned audits to every department, deep investigations into contracts, spending, client deals. If there was rot left in the bones of Wellsworth, I intended to find it, rip it out, and expose it to the light. Within days, the reports began to trickle in, then flood. Misappropriated funds, falsified expense accounts, under the table, deals with shady corporations. It was worse than I had imagined. Perfect, because now I had everything I needed to not just reform the company, but to make an example out of it. The media was going to have a field day. I sat in my corner office late that Friday night, the city stretching out before me, lights winking in the dark like 1,000 watching eyes. On the desk before me, stacks of evidence were neatly organized. Each folder a weapon. At the center was the biggest prize, a contract proving that the old leadership had laundered millions through shell corporations in the Caymans, then funneled it back into personal accounts disguised as consulting fees. Langston. Bradford. Even a few board members who had slithered out of the building earlier with fake smiles and promises to stay in touch. I smiled grimly. They thought they could walk away. They thought they could escape justice. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Monday morning, the storm broke. I personally handed the files over to a major investigative journalist I'd quietly cultivated contact with. Within hours, headlines were splashed across every major business outlet. Wellsworth and Comer corruption scandal. Millions embezzled, executives under investigation. The fallout was immediate. The phone lines in the office rang off the hook. Clients demanding answers, reporters hungry for quotes, former executives leaving panicked, desperate voicemails. I ignored them all. Instead, I called a mandatory all-hands meeting. The auditorium was packed. Employees shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The tension so thick it was almost visible. Cameras from local news outlets lined the back wall. I took the stage without ceremony, stepping up to the podium and letting the silence stretch long enough to make every heartbeat feel deafening. "You all know why we're here," I began, voice steady. "The truth is out, and it's ugly." I paused, letting my words sink in. "But this is not the end of Wellsworth & Co. It's the beginning of something new." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Those responsible for the corruption have been reported to authorities. Internal audits are ongoing. Anyone complicit will be held accountable. There will be no cover-ups, no second chances. I let my gaze sweep across the room. If you are here because you believe in building something better, a company that values integrity over greed, then stay. Stand with me. I saw heads nodding, eyes lighting up with something dangerously close to hope. But if you're here to cling to the old ways, to cover up, to scheme, to protect your own at the expense of others, leave now. Silence. Then slowly, one man in a tailored suit stood. He gathered his things and walked out without a word. Another followed. Then another. Good. Better. To cut the poison out quickly. When the doors closed behind them, I smiled, small but real. "To those who remain," I said, "welcome to the future." In the weeks that followed, we rebuilt. Not just the structure of the company, but its soul. I promoted from within. The overlooked, the underestimated, the ones who had been grinding in the shadows while the corrupt played their games. We set up whistleblower hotlines. We revised contracts. We rewrote the employee handbook to reflect our new values. Clients who had abandoned us in fear began to return. Tentative at first, then with growing enthusiasm as they saw the genuine change taking root. Revenue stabilized, then grew. Wellsworth & Co. was no longer a monument to greed. It was becoming a beacon. Late one evening, as I walked through the office, I paused by a window overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered under the stars. I thought of my father then, of his dreams, his disappointments, his belief that the world would always belong to the corrupt, and I made a silent promise, not just to him, but to every underestimated fighter out there. This world could be better. It would be, and it would start with me. Success never goes unnoticed, especially not by those who profit from the old ways. It didn't take long for Wellsworth's rebirth to draw attention, and not all of it was welcome. Whispers started first. Anonymous tips warning of consequences if I didn't back down. Mysterious emails slipped into my inbox at midnight, promising deals if I restored the old order. I deleted them all without hesitation. Then came the pressure. Key clients hinted that unless certain discrete partnerships were reinstated, they'd pull their business. Suppliers suddenly renegotiated contracts, citing unexpected market shifts. Even the building management company claimed safety concerns that mysteriously aligned with my office renovations. It was coordinated, calculated, desperate, but I had anticipated it. Power doesn't yield without a fight. I leaned harder into transparency, released public statements about the corruption cleanup, highlighted the company's commitment to ethical practices. I made it clear, Wellsworth would rise or fall on new terms, not old compromises. Still, the attacks escalated. One night, as I worked late, again, I noticed a shadow lingering near the parking garage entrance. When I approached, it vanished into the darkness, but a note was left pinned to my windshield. "Walk away, or we make you disappear." The handwriting was precise, controlled, professional. I smiled grimly. They still thought threats would work on me. I wasn't afraid. I was furious. The next morning, I called a meeting with my new security team. Ex-military, loyal, and as relentless as I needed them to be. We upgraded every protocol: cameras, guards, background checks. No one entered Wellsworth & Co. without clearance. Then I went on the offensive. I hired investigators, the best money could buy. Former federal agents, cybersecurity experts. I gave them a single directive: find out who was behind the threats. Find out who still clung to the shadows of the old regime. Within a week, I had names: former board members, ex-clients, rival firms, even a handful of government officials who had benefited from Wellsworth's corruption in the past. They thought they could bully me into silence. They thought wrong. At a press conference broadcast live across the city, I stood at the podium and dropped bombshell after bombshell, documented evidence of collusion between Wellsworth's old leadership and dirty politicians, records of bribery, extortion, fraud. I named names. I burned bridges, and I did it with a smile. The fallout was nuclear. Arrests were made. Investigations launched. The ripple effects spread far beyond Wellsworth & Co., shaking the foundations of power structures that had ruled unchecked for decades. Of course, it painted a target on my back even bigger than before, but it also made it clear I wasn't just playing defense. I was rewriting the rules. Weeks later, as I walked through the now bustling Wellsworth offices, rejuvenated, vibrant, alive, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. Pride. Not just for surviving, for changing the game. It wasn't perfect. Mistakes were made, battles were lost along the way, but we were building something real, something lasting, and the enemies that lurked in the shadows, let them come. Because Wellsworth & Co. wasn't just standing, it was thriving, and so was I. Success can be a dangerous thing. The more Wellsworth thrived under my leadership, the more enemies stirred in the dark. Some were old foes licking their wounds and plotting revenge. Others were new players, bigger, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous. They didn't just want Wellsworth crushed. They wanted me destroyed. It started subtly. Anonymous complaints filed against our firm. Investigations launched with suspiciously little evidence. Regulatory audits popping up one after another, each more invasive than the last. The goal was obvious: drown us in red tape, exhaust me, make me slip up. But if they thought I'd crumble under pressure, they hadn't been paying attention. Instead of retreating, I expanded. We opened new offices in 3 major cities, launched a bold new marketing campaign showcasing our rebirth story. Clients who once hesitated now flocked to us, eager to align themselves with a company that had survived scandal and come out stronger. Every move we made was a middle finger to the old guard, and they hated it. One night, after a grueling 16-hour day, I received a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Congratulations, Ms. Lane," a smooth voice purred on the other end. "You've made quite the spectacle." "Who is this?" A soft chuckle. "Someone who appreciates a good rise to power, and who knows how quickly it can be taken away." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I stared at the phone for a long moment, then set it down carefully. This wasn't just sabotage anymore. It was war. I called an emergency meeting with my senior team the next morning. We went into full lockdown mode, tightening security even further, scrutinizing every deal, every communication. I hired additional legal teams, crisis managers, cybersecurity experts. I wasn't paranoid. I was prepared. Because if they wanted to play dirty, so could I. Within weeks, our suspicions were confirmed. An anonymous shell company had been buying up our suppliers, cutting us off at the knees. Another front had launched a whisper campaign, planting rumors about Wellsworth's unstable leadership in key markets. They wanted to isolate us, they wanted to starve us, and they were damn good at it, but not good enough. I adapted. I pivoted supply. Chains to smaller, more loyal partners. Businesses the giants had overlooked and underestimated. I doubled down on internal loyalty, offering profit-sharing programs to employees who stayed through the storm, and I went hunting. Through careful investigation, We traced the attacks back to a conglomerate called Orion Holdings, a sprawling network with interests in finance, tech, real estate. On paper, they were untouchable. Untouchable, unless you knew where to look. And I did. Orion had skeletons, plenty of them. I tasked my investigators with gathering every piece of dirt they could find. Labor violations, tax fraud, hidden offshore accounts. I was going to give Orion Holdings the same treatment I gave Wellsworth's old regime, only this time it would be bigger, messier, and much, much louder. Late one evening, reviewing the latest dossier on Orion, I felt the weight of it settle over me. This was bigger than I had ever intended. The stakes were higher, the risks deadlier. But then I thought of my father, of the look in his eyes the day he realized the system was rigged against him, of the promise I made to myself standing over his grave. No more fear, no more backing down. If they wanted a war, they were about to get one. And this time, I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for everyone who'd ever been crushed by the machine, for everyone who never got the chance to fight back. I closed the file, straightened my jacket, and smiled. Let's see how Orion Holdings liked being hunted. Orion Holdings thought they could intimidate me into silence. They thought wrong. I wasn't here to play by their rules. I was here to burn their entire playbook to ash. The first step was infiltration. My investigators, working in complete secrecy, began piecing together Orion's dirty laundry. Shell companies used to funnel illegal funds, front organizations disguising unethical labor practices, confidential memos implicating senior executives in backroom deals. Every lead led to another rotten branch on their decaying tree. I didn't just want to expose Orion, I wanted to dismantle them, piece by corrupt piece. One evening, sitting in my office surrounded by files thicker than phone books, I found the thread I needed. Orion's Achilles heel, a subsidiary posing as a charitable foundation, laundering millions through philanthropic grants to political allies. One leak to the right journalist, and the entire tower of cards would come crashing down. But I didn't leak it. Not yet. I wanted to see the look in their eyes when they realized who was behind the blade pressed to their throat. I sent a message. Delivered old-school style, a thick envelope, no return address, hand-delivered to Orion Holdings' pristine headquarters. Inside, copies of the evidence and a simple handwritten note. Your move. They responded faster than I expected. 2 days later, an invitation arrived. A private meeting request, neutral ground, a luxury hotel penthouse. They wanted to talk, or threaten, or bribe, or kill. The possibilities were endless. I accepted because I wasn't afraid of meeting monsters. I had become something they should fear far more. The penthouse smelled of expensive cigars and cold ambition. A man in an immaculate gray suit waited by the YCR window, the city glittering behind him like 1,000 lies. Ms. Lane, he greeted me, voice oily with fake warmth. You've been very busy. Just getting started, I replied coolly. He chuckled, gesturing to a leather chair. I didn't sit. Let's not waste time, he said. You're smart. You know how the game is played. There's no need for unpleasantness. Unpleasantness like fraud, exploitation, and blackmail? I asked, tilting my head. His smile tightened. Everyone gets their hands dirty at this level. Not everyone forgets they can be held accountable. He sighed, as if dealing with a stubborn child. Look, Harper. May I call you Harper? I didn't respond. You have potential. We see that. You could be so much more than this. Crusade. Join us. Real power, real influence, money beyond your wildest dreams. All you have to do is step back. It would have been tempting once, before I watched my father die with nothing but broken dreams, before I saw what real power did to good people, before I became someone who would never, ever bow again. I smiled, slow and razor-sharp. Tell your masters, I said, that I don't kneel. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. The man's smile vanished. Then you leave us no choice, he said softly. Good, I whispered. I dropped a USB drive onto the glass table between us. This hits the media in 12 hours, I said. Unless Orion Holdings publicly admits its crimes, dissolves its illegal subsidiaries, and donates half its assets to real, audited charitable organizations. He stared at the drive like it was a live grenade. "You're bluffing," he said. I leaned in, close enough to see the first flicker of doubt in his eyes. "Try me." I left without another word. The next morning, the headlines exploded. Whistleblower. Exposes Orion Holdings scandal. Major conglomerate faces federal investigation. Assets frozen amidst money laundering allegations. Orion tried to fight. Lawyers, PR firms, crisis managers. But it was too late. The public outrage was a wildfire they couldn't contain. Shareholders revolted. Government agencies descended. Former allies turned on them like vultures smelling blood. Within a month, Orion Holdings was nothing but a cautionary tale, and Harper Lane? She wasn't a cautionary tale. She was a legend. Late one night, standing in my office, watching the city below, I thought about everything it had cost. The nights alone. The friendships sacrificed. The scars etched deep. Was it worth it? I thought of my father's quiet dignity, of the young interns now walking Wellsworth's halls with hope in their eyes, of the people who would never even know that. Someone fought for them. Yes, it was worth it, because some battles aren't fought for applause. They're fought for the future, and mine was just getting started. Victory tasted sweet, but I knew better than anyone that success painted a target on your back. As Wellsworth's reputation soared and Orion Holdings lay in ruins, other players began circling, some curious, some envious, and some outright hostile. They saw Wellsworth as a prize ripe for the taking, led by a woman who, in their minds, had simply gotten lucky. They couldn't have been more wrong. I had no intention of merely surviving the aftermath. I intended to build something so strong, so unshakable that no force, corporate, political, or otherwise, could tear it down. It wasn't enough to be a legend. I had to be a fortress. The first step was diversification. I pushed Wellsworth into new industries, technology, green energy, ethical finance. I sought out companies led by visionaries, fighters, the kind of people who knew what it meant to claw their way up from nothing. We invested, partnered, acquired. We didn't just expand, we evolved. Of course, it wasn't without resistance. Boardrooms that once laughed behind closed doors now sent polite invitations for strategic partnerships. Some came bearing smiles and hidden knives. I accepted their invitations and dismantled their proposals with brutal precision. Every deal we signed, every alliance we forged was another brick in the fortress I was building. But I wasn't naive. I knew the bigger we grew, the more powerful the enemies we would attract, and they were already watching. One afternoon, as I prepared for a keynote speech at a major business summit, my chief of security handed me a dossier. It detailed surveillance operations being conducted against me, my home, my offices, my staff. They were looking for weaknesses. I smiled as I closed the file. Let them look. They wouldn't find cracks. They would find steel. The keynote was a turning point. I stood before an audience of industry titans, media moguls, political powerhouses, many of whom had once seen Wellsworth as a joke or a warning. Now, they listened with rapt attention. We live in a world, I said, where integrity has been treated like a weakness, where success is too often built on exploitation and deceit. Wellsworth chooses a different path. We choose to win without losing our souls. It was a direct challenge and an invitation. Join us or be left behind. The applause was thunderous, not because they all believed me, not yet, but because they recognized the inevitable. Change wasn't coming, it was already here, and I was leading it. In the weeks following the summit, new opportunities flooded in. Governments sought Wellsworth's expertise for ethical investment projects. Startups pitched ideas with real-world impact. International firms offered collaborations that once would have been unthinkable. But with opportunity came risk. Not everyone welcomed the new order. Late one evening, as I reviewed merger proposals, a package arrived at my office. No return address. Inside, a single item, a chess piece, a black king, snapped cleanly in half, a warning, a declaration. Someone out there hadn't given up. Someone was preparing their next move. I set the broken piece on my desk, right beside the framed photo of my father. His steady gaze met mine, full of the quiet strength he had carried to his last breath. "Let them come," I whispered. I wasn't the pawn they thought I was. I was the player. And the game had only just begun. The next move came faster than I expected. 3 days after the broken chess piece arrived, one of our major projects, a sustainable energy partnership, was sabotaged. The media latched onto the scandal immediately, spinning wild narratives of mismanagement and greed. Old enemies resurfaced, whispering into reporters' ears, fueling the fire. They wanted to break my credibility. They wanted the world to doubt me. But they had underestimated how much damage I could take before I shattered, and how much stronger I would become afterward. I didn't retreat. I confronted the scandal head-on, holding a press conference where I laid out every fact, every piece of evidence showing the sabotage was external. I named names, carefully, strategically, exposing the tangled web of corporate spies and dirty tricks. Some reporters still looked at me with skepticism. Some believed. It didn't matter. I wasn't there to win a popularity contest. I was there to win. Internally, I tightened the reins. I cut loose anyone whose loyalty wavered, no matter how high up they sat. I promoted those who had stood firm, who had proven they were willing to fight alongside me. We rebuilt faster than anyone expected. Investors returned, some cautiously, some boldly. Wellsworth didn't just survive the attack, it grew. But every victory brought a sharper response. Threats against my life became more direct. Anonymous letters, ominous phone calls, strange cars lingering outside my building. Security teams doubled, then tripled. Yet I refused to hide. I refused to show weakness, because fear was exactly what they wanted, and I would rather burn than give them the satisfaction. The real war began when they targeted my people. Not just me. Staff members were followed home, anonymous threats sent to their families. One executive's car was tampered with. He barely survived the accident. It was no longer a cold corporate battle fought in boardrooms. It was a street fight, a shadow war where the rules didn't exist. I called an emergency meeting with my core leadership team. In that room, behind locked doors and encrypted communications, I made it clear, this isn't about profit anymore. This isn't about Wellsworth's reputation. This is about survival, ours, and the future we're building. If anyone here wants out, no judgment. You can walk away. No one moved. I felt a swell of something fierce and painful, pride. Loyalty isn't bought, it's earned. We mapped out a strategy. Every executive assigned a security detail, families protected, communication lines hardened, a war room established to monitor threats and responses. We weren't just defending anymore. We were hunting. Our investigations uncovered the force behind the attacks. An old rival firm, Blackstone Group, operating through proxies and front companies to hide their hand. They had ties to organized crime, to corrupt officials, to black ops units willing to play dirty. Blackstone had seen Wellsworth's rise as a threat to their empire. They had decided to crush us before we could eclipse them. I decided to return the favor. We hit back economically first. Strategic acquisitions targeted Blackstone's hidden assets. Lawsuits filed in multiple jurisdictions, draining their resources, dragging their name into scandal. Whistleblowers within their ranks, incentivized by hefty bonuses and immunity deals, came forward with damning evidence. Every week, another Blackstone deal collapsed. Another ally abandoned them. Their empire, once so solid, began to crack. But they didn't go down easily. One night, my security chief burst into my office, face grim. "There's a credible threat," he said. "They're planning something, tonight." What kind of something? Assassination attempt. For a moment, just a heartbeat, a cold shard of fear sliced through me. Then it was gone. "Then let's be ready," I said. We fortified the building, evacuated non-essential staff, trapped entrances rigged to lock down instantly. I waited in my office, lights low, watching the city glitter beyond the glass. Hours passed, then movement. Unmarked vans pulling up to the loading docks, dark figures slipping out, armed. They thought they were hunters. They didn't realize they were walking into a trap. The security team moved with brutal efficiency. Silent alarms triggered, doors locked, tactical units engaged. The fight was quick, vicious, decisive. When the police arrived minutes later, they found the would-be assassins zip-tied on the floor, faces bloodied, weapons confiscated. Evidence linked the operation directly to Blackstone. Game over. The arrests that followed made headlines around the world. CEOs, board members, hired mercenaries, all exposed. Blackstone's stock plummeted. Their allies fled. Within a month, the company collapsed, swallowed by lawsuits, criminal charges, public outrage. And Wellsworth? Wellsworth stood taller than ever. I stood taller than ever. But I knew this was not the end. There would always be another threat. Another empire built on exploitation, waiting for someone to challenge it. And I would be ready. Because I wasn't just fighting for my company anymore. Was fighting for an idea. That you could win without becoming the monsters you defeated. That integrity wasn't weakness. That justice wasn't just a dream. I looked out over the city, the skyline sharp against the night, and smiled. Let them come. I was just getting started. Victory against Blackstone changed everything. Wellsworth was no longer just a company, it was a symbol. People across industries, across borders, whispered about us, not with mockery anymore, but with awe and fear. Investors sought us out. Governments extended invitations. Universities asked me to speak about resilience and leadership. But I wasn't interested in being a talking head or a figurehead. I had bigger plans. If Wellsworth could survive Blackstone, Orion, and the old corrupt guard, then Wellsworth could do more. We could reshape the future. The first step was globalization. Not the old model of greedy expansion, but a new blueprint, ethical investment. Into emerging markets, real partnerships with communities, transparency at every level. We launched Wellsworth Global Initiatives, focusing on sustainable development, ethical tech, and social entrepreneurship. It was ambitious, risky, revolutionary. Perfect. Of course, the moment we announced our intentions, the real power brokers noticed. Old money families, hidden dynasties, international conglomerates that had spent decades, even centuries, shaping the world in their image. They didn't see Wellsworth as a threat. They saw me as an anomaly to be corrected. Their first move was subtle. Invitations to exclusive gatherings, offers to join elite councils, private meetings in luxurious villas and yachts where veiled threats were disguised as champagne toasts. They wanted me to play the game their way. They wanted me to bow. I smiled politely. I shook hands. I accepted the champagne, and I rejected every single offer, because I hadn't come this far to be another puppet, and I damn sure hadn't bled to build an empire just to hand it over to the same parasites who destroyed my father. The retaliation started almost immediately. Media hit pieces appeared overnight, painting Wellsworth Global Initiatives as naive, reckless, unsustainable. Anonymous. Experts claimed we were destabilizing markets. Leaks suggested corruption where there was none. Old allies grew cautious. New partners hesitated. It was a sophisticated smear campaign designed not to destroy me outright, but to bleed me slowly. Death by 1,000 cuts. I didn't panic. I adapted. We doubled down on transparency, publishing detailed audits and open child insights reports. We created partnerships with watchdog organizations, daring them to scrutinize everything we did. We embraced the narrative of the underdog fighting entrenched power. We turned every attack into proof that we were rattling the right cages. And behind the scenes, I built alliances of my own. Grassroots movements. Young innovators hungry for change. Local leaders tired of foreign exploitation. We formed a network. Stronger than any boardroom deal because it was built on shared vision, not greed. Wellsworth wasn't just surviving globalization. We were redefining it. Of course, the old powers weren't finished. They moved to the next phase, divide and conquer. They approached my senior executives with offers too good to refuse. Positions at prestigious institutions, payouts disguised as consulting fees, Threats hidden inside concerns for their future. Some resisted, some didn't. Betrayals came to light like cracks in glass under pressure. I dealt with them swiftly, brutally. No second chances, no negotiations. Loyalty was not optional, not in this war. For every defector, I found two more. True believers to replace them. People who understood that we weren't just building a company or even an empire. We were building a future where integrity and ambition could coexist. A future where power didn't require corruption. A future worth bleeding for. The final blow came from an unexpected front. A coalition of old money families moved to block Wellsworth's expansion into key global markets using legal loopholes, political pressure, and financial manipulation. If they succeeded, it would strangle our growth before it could take root. I had two choices: play defense, fight 1,000 little fires and hope to survive, or launch an attack so audacious, so undeniable that the world would have no choice. But to take notice, I chose the latter. We organized a global summit, inviting innovators, activists, young leaders, and disillusioned business figures from around the world. We framed it not as a corporate event, but as a movement. A declaration of independence from the old ways of doing business. Over 3 days, with cameras broadcasting to every major network, we unveiled Wellsworth's new global strategy: direct investment in community-led projects, open-source technology, initiatives, transparent governance models that gave stakeholders real power. We didn't just talk about change, we embodied it. The response was electric. Millions watched online. Thousands attended in person. Dozens of major partners signed on publicly, pledging their support. And the old guard? They watched helplessly as their grip on the future slipped away. Late one night, after the summit ended, I stood alone on the balcony of the convention center, looking out over the city skyline. It glowed with possibility, with danger, with hope. I knew the war wasn't over. There would always be another battle, another enemy, another betrayal. But for the first time, I didn't feel like a survivor clinging to victory. I felt like a pioneer, carving a new path through a broken world. And I wasn't walking it alone anymore. They tried to break me. They tried to silence me. They tried to erase me. Instead, I became the storm. The summit was only the beginning. Within weeks, our movement gained momentum faster than even I anticipated. Young entrepreneurs, disillusioned politicians, activists tired of begging for scraps, they all rallied under the Wellsworth banner. It wasn't just business anymore, it was revolution. The old guard watched with growing panic. They had spent centuries perfecting a system that served only themselves. And now, a woman they had dismissed as a naive idealist was tearing it apart, one success story at a time. Their counterattack came swiftly, coordinated, merciless. Blackmail attempts surfaced, targeting my allies. Whispers of scandal spread like wildfire. Claims of misappropriated funds, secret agendas, betrayal within our ranks. Several key partners withdrew, terrified of being dragged into the storm. Stock prices fluctuated wildly. Media outlets, once cautiously supportive, turned hostile overnight. They were trying to isolate me, to make Wellsworth look vulnerable, to sow doubt. But I had planned for this. We had built redundancies, created alliances that weren't based on contracts, but on shared ideals. When some partners fled, others stepped forward, fiercer and more loyal than ever. The attacks, instead of breaking us, revealed who truly believed in the future we were creating. Still, the pressure was relentless. My days became a blur of crisis meetings, public addresses, and sleepless nights analyzing threats. I lived under constant surveillance. Security protocols tightened to near military levels. Every email encrypted, every route to and from headquarters, changed daily. But fear had no hold on me anymore. Only purpose. The final battle came in the form of an international tribunal, a sham trial orchestrated by the old powers to investigate Wellsworth for supposed violations of global trade laws. They intended it as a public execution, a way to discredit me permanently on the world stage. I accepted their summons without hesitation. The tribunal convened in Geneva, a spectacle broadcast live across the globe. The old money elite filled the chamber cloaked in the false dignity of concerned global citizens. Reporters salivated, cameras rolled, analysts predicted my downfall. They underestimated me. Again. I entered the chamber not as a defendant, but as a force of nature. For hours, they hurled accusations, fabricated documents, twisted narratives, paid witnesses spouting rehearsed lies. I dismantled each one calmly, methodically, with hard evidence, expert testimony, and the undeniable truth of Wellsworth's impact. When they accused me of destabilizing markets, I showed how Wellsworth revitalized economies abandoned by traditional investors. When they claimed we manipulated governments, I revealed their own backroom dealings, their own histories of exploitation and corruption. I didn't just defend Wellsworth, I exposed them. Live, unfiltered, irrevocable. By the end of the proceedings, the tribunal had become a trial of the old world, not of me. The people watching around the globe saw it clearly. The future was not in the hands of those who clung to power through fear and greed. It belonged to those who dared to build something better. The tribunal collapsed in disgrace. Charges dismissed. Apologies issued. And Wellsworth? We soared. Our support tripled. New markets opened. Governments, once wary, now courted us eagerly. Universities rewrote case studies around our strategies. Young leaders around the world wore Wellsworth pins like badges of honor. But for me, the greatest victory wasn't the accolades or the headlines. It was the knowledge that we had survived. The worst they could throw at us, and thrived. We had not compromised. We had not surrendered. We had proven that a different kind of empire was possible. One built not on fear, but on hope. Not on exploitation, but on empowerment. Not on secrets, but on truth. Late one evening, back in my office, I stood looking out over a world that felt more open and more dangerous than ever before. We had won a battle, maybe even a war, but the work was far from finished. Real change is never a single victory. It's a lifetime of choices. A million battles fought every day in boardrooms, classrooms, factories, and hearts. And I was ready. Because I wasn't just fighting anymore, I was building, and this was just the beginning. Victory in Geneva echoed across the world, but I knew better than anyone that real power didn't lie in isolated victories. It lived in permanence. If Wellsworth was going to survive beyond me, it needed to be more than a corporation. It needed to be a nation, without borders, without masters, built on values no regime could outlaw. And so the Wellsworth Foundation was born, not as a charity, but as a sovereign economic entity, a coalition of businesses, innovators, communities, and activists united under a single flag of principles rather than geography. We drafted our own charter, modeled after the best ideas from broken systems, stripped of corruption, rewritten in the language of transparency and collaboration. We didn't ask for permission. We simply acted. At first, the world mocked us. Politicians rolled their eyes. Billionaires sneered. News anchors labeled it a publicity stunt, a utopian fantasy. But while they laughed, we moved. Cities devastated. By economic collapse signed on, eager for investment without exploitation. Scientists trapped by bureaucratic red tape found freedom under our banner. Displaced workers, disillusioned students, dreamers who had given up, they all came. Not for profit, not for charity, for purpose. Within a year, Wellsworth-owned communities sprung up across 5 continents. Renewable energy grids, open-source education systems, decentralized banking run by and for the people. Where governments failed, Wellsworth filled the void efficiently, transparently, unapologetically. The old powers tried everything to stop us: trade sanctions, propaganda campaigns, covert operations to destabilize our projects. It only fueled our momentum. Every blockade they threw up became proof that their systems were designed not to serve people, but to control them. I understood then that we weren't just building an alternative. We were exposing a lie. The lie that the world had to be the way it was. And once people saw the truth, they couldn't unsee it. Of course, nothing worth building comes without sacrifice. Not everyone who joined our cause stayed loyal. Some tried to twist Wellsworth into their own image, hungry for personal power. We rooted them out, swiftly and without mercy. Not through executions or purges, but through transparency. Every meeting recorded, every transaction logged. Corruption couldn't survive sunlight. The cost was high. Constant vigilance. Endless battles in courts, on screens, in hearts and minds. But the rewards were immeasurable. Children attending. Schools where critical thinking was valued over rote obedience. Communities where healthcare wasn't a privilege, but a right. Innovation unleashed from the shackles of politics and greed. And through it all, Wellsworth didn't just endure. We thrived. Late one night, standing on the balcony of Wellsworth's new headquarters, an emerald tower rising over a city reborn, I watched the stars scatter across the sky. For the first time in my life, I felt not just victorious, but free. Free from the lies they told us about how the world had to work. Free from the chains of fear and cynicism. Free to imagine and to build something better. And I knew. This was only the beginning. Because the future didn't belong to the few who hoarded power in ivory towers. It belonged to those who dared to believe that the impossible was possible. And I, Harper Lane, wasn't just daring to believe. I was daring to lead. Wellsworth had become more than an entity. It was a living, breathing force of change. But true legacy isn't built on a single lifetime. It demands continuity. It demands successors who can carry the flame higher than we ever could. I realized that if Wellsworth's vision was to survive beyond me, I needed to build not just systems, but leaders. Leaders who understood that power was not a prize, but a responsibility. We launched the Wellsworth Leadership Institute, a global academy for developing young minds from every corner of the world, regardless of wealth, nationality, or background. Entry was based not on privilege, but on merit and heart. The curriculum rejected traditional rote memorization. Instead, it focused on ethics, critical thinking, innovation, and resilience. We didn't teach them to compete. We taught them to collaborate, to challenge, to lead with both courage and compassion. At first, enrollment was small. Suspicion ran deep after generations of broken promises. But success breeds faith. The first class graduated and went on to transform communities, rebuild industries, create movements. Applications flooded in by the thousands. A new generation was rising, one that would refuse to be silent, refuse to be bought, refuse to bow. And it was beautiful, but as Wellsworth expanded its reach, so did the threats. The old powers, wounded but not dead, regrouped. They evolved. No longer hiding behind outdated structures, they adapted to the new world we created. They infiltrated technology, manipulated narratives, seeded doubt where hope had barely begun to grow. They couldn't beat Wellsworth head-on, so they aimed at the people we inspired. Propaganda machines spun new lies, whispering that Wellsworth was just another empire in disguise. That our leaders were no different from the tyrants we replaced. That hope itself was a scam. I watched the tide of public sentiment shift, not in waves, but in subtle undercurrents. A hesitation in the eyes of partners, a delay in signatures, a tremble of uncertainty. And I understood. The greatest battles are never fought with weapons. They are fought for hearts and minds. I knew I had to adapt again. Become not just a builder, but a storyteller. Wellsworth launched a new global initiative. Open. Forums, digital town halls, transparency campaigns broadcasting every decision, every process, every success and failure in real time. No more walls, no more ivory towers, just brutal, unfiltered honesty. And it worked. Slowly, painfully, the trust began to rebuild. The shadows receded, but it came at a cost. I became the face of a movement bigger than I ever intended. Every word I spoke weighed tenfold. Every choice dissected by billions of unseen eyes. Privacy became a myth. Every mistake magnified. Every victory questioned. Some nights, alone in my office, I wondered if it was worth it. Then I would think of the children. In a Wellsworth school learning to ask why instead of memorizing how. I would think of the farmers using Wellsworth microgrids to power their communities. I would think of the dreamers who once had no stage to stand on, now leading revolutions of their own. And I would remember, this was never about me. It was about Them, it was about all of us. Legacy isn't carved in stone. It's woven through lives touched, minds awakened, futures changed. And as I looked out over a world still raw, still broken, but undeniably more awake than when I first began, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. They would try to erase me. They would try to bury Wellsworth. They would try to drag the world back into silence. But it wouldn't work, because ideas, once unleashed, cannot be chained again. Because truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. Because hope, once ignited, burns. Forever. And somewhere, in every corner of this battered, beautiful planet, there would always be another Harper Lane rising. Building a movement is one thing. Sustaining it beyond your lifetime is another. As Wellsworth blossomed into a network of empowered communities, it was clear that my role was shifting. I had led the revolution. Now I had to let it outgrow me. True leadership isn't about holding on. It's about knowing when to let go. We established the Wellsworth Global Council, an elected body of representatives from every region where our model had taken root. Scientists, educators, entrepreneurs, community leaders. No politicians, no oligarchs, no relics of the systems we had dismantled. The council would govern Wellsworth's future democratically, guided by the charter we built. My role became ceremonial, a mentor, a founder, a reminder of why we began. It wasn't easy. Every instinct screamed to protect, to guard, to control. But I knew the same instincts that once saved me could now destroy everything if I let fear dictate my actions. And so, with a deep breath, I stepped back. I watched as the first generation of Wellsworth leaders took the helm. I watched them stumble, argue, innovate, dream. And I felt something rare, something precious. Pride. Not in myself, in them. Of course, not everyone welcomed Wellsworth's evolution. The remnants of the old powers still clung to influence in isolated pockets. Some launched smear campaigns. Others attempted economic sabotage. A few even plotted violence. But the world had changed. The people had changed. When lies were spread, communities exposed them with facts. When sabotage was attempted, local leaders rallied to rebuild faster and stronger. When violence was threatened, millions stood together, not under one flag, but under one belief, that dignity, justice, and hope were not privileges, but rights. The old world wasn't just losing, it was fading. As for me, I found a strange peace in the transition. I spent my days mentoring young leaders, visiting Wellsworth communities, writing about the lessons we learned and the mistakes we made. Because there were mistakes. Many. Times when we moved too fast. Times when ambition clouded judgment. Times when fear nearly made us betray our ideals. But mistakes aren't failures unless you refuse to learn from them. And Wellsworth never stopped learning. One evening, standing atop a cliff overlooking a thriving Wellsworth settlement, solar. Grids sparkling in the twilight, children laughing in fields that had once been barren, I felt a hand slip into mine. It was a young girl, no older than 6, her eyes bright with a future she hadn't yet had to fight for. "Did you build all this?" she asked. I knelt beside her, smiling. "No," I said. "We all did." And it was true. Wellsworth wasn't mine. It never had been. It belonged to every person who refused to give up, to every voice that refused to be silenced, to every dream that refused to die. As the stars blossomed overhead, I realized that my journey, the journey that began with vengeance, fueled by rage and loss, had led to something I never dared hope for. Healing, not just for me, for the world. And though my name would one day fade from memory, the seeds we planted would continue to grow, long after I was gone. Because hope, once ignited, never truly dies. It becomes a wildfire, and Wellsworth was just the first spark.